Hello and welcome to another episode of Transformational Blueprints, where we try to put a dent in the large number of transformation programs that fail. Hosted by me, Mario Michaels, founder and director of Jet2 Group. On this series, we will bring you unique insights drawn from first-hand experience from some of the most high-profile architecture and transformation leaders across the globe. Topics told in order to share knowledge, experiences and ideas to inspire, innovate and give back to the architecture community. So grab a coffee, sit back and relax. Welcome everybody. Welcome to Transformational Blueprints podcast. Today we are joined by Tom Dean and we're going to talk about a potential idea to improve diversity in an architecture function. So a bit of background on Tom. Tom studied computer science at university. He left university in 2015 and became an IT recruiter for a successful recruitment firm in London. Later moved to Leeds and joined another very successful recruitment agency. He left there to go and join the internal talent team at Sky. And this is where it gets interesting. In 2017, he was offered his first architecture role with EE and was quickly transferred into BT, where he spent 4 years working for BT and then moved to Every as a solutions architect just over a year. And currently he's a solutions architect for Jet2 and Jet2 Holidays. And he's been there just over a year. He works across the operations pillar, covering everything from airline operations to in-resort customer management. And in his personal life, he's a dad to a 1-year-old boy and plays golf to as he calls it, an unspectacular handicap of 14 and also training for the marathon. Tom, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So I know I've given you a bit of an introduction there, but just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your career and where you are and where you got to, how you got here. Sorry.
Yeah, so I suppose I've got probably one of the more unique solution architecture backgrounds. It's always a point of conversation when I've interviewed for jobs.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm currently a solution architect at Jet2 and I'm working quite heavily across quite a lot of areas, which is great. Been kept quite nice and busy. But yeah, my background, I originally studied computer science at university. I actually had full intentions to join the British Army and I actually wanted to go into the Signals Corps. So computer science was a natural degree to study and it aligned quite nicely to the Signals. Fortunately, wasn't able to join the Army in the end, but I kind of left university and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I'll be brutally honest with you, I wasn't the greatest developer in the world. I found it quite difficult at university to kind of keep up the pace. My course was really varied, which, is great, but you don't get a lot of time to spend getting even relatively proficient at something. You do 1 semester in C# and then the next semester it's in Java and you're kind of like, oh, it's a bit quick. And so I sort of left. The course was very heavily focused around programming, with very little around kind of the other professions that you come across in technology. I'd never heard of an architect, let alone sort of had done any sort of architecture. The closest thing I think we did a kind of module on UML, which even then is, was like a couple of months. And that was pretty much it. I left university, became an IT recruiter, natural, friend said, oh, you might be able to earn some money. And that point was, poor university student leaving uni, no job, living in London, needed to earn some money. Seemed like a good idea at the time. I'm going to describe myself as a mediocre recruiter, to be brutally honest. I really enjoyed the kind of relationships aspect of recruitment, and it certainly held me in good stead. And then, I was very, very fortunate through my job in recruitment to come across architecture as a domain and as a profession. And then I was really, really fortunate to meet a couple of people in that world who really taught me a lot. And I think that you notice now that a lot of recruiters are now going out and kind of taking industry accreditation or doing industry kind of courses. So they're able to familiarize themselves. And I suppose wasn't necessarily ahead of my time in that respect, but it was certainly I spent a lot of time learning more about what a day-to-day job of an architect looked like, rather than sort of just looking at a job description and going stakeholder management, TOGAF, .NET, that type of stuff. But yeah, I kept in touch with these guys, and then eventually I was offered a role at EE, what was EE at the time, where it still is EE, to work for EE in their digital department. And I think that was working with one of your previous podcasts.
Yeah.
One of your previous podcasts seemed to be coming out, I think. So I worked there, and I basically started to learn my trade there. So it's been an interesting introduction and a kind of interesting path to get where I am now.
It's really fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation for that very reason. And because your background isn't that of a traditional architect, if that's how we want to sort of coin it, in your opinion, what do you think makes a great architect?
I think the thing what people probably find the hardest part of architecture is being able to go and walk into one room and then walk into another room and talk about the same problem, but using two completely different languages.
Yeah.
You sit in the room with, I'll call them the business, the less technical areas, basically the guys you're building stuff for and working for, they're your primary stakeholders. And they'll talk to you about a very real business problem, and you'll try and come up with a solution which they'll understand, or you'll talk to them about ideas or options that they'll understand. And then translating that into a conversation with, say, a group of developers who maybe are slightly more, they're not necessarily thinking about the business problem. They're thinking about the actual real life. How do we actually build this thing? How do we solve the problem of building this? And I think that's probably the hardest skill to kind of master. And I don't know if I've quite done it yet. Certainly, I'm well on my way to my sort of 10,000 hours of practice before I can sort of call myself a master. But yeah, to me, that's probably the hardest bit. And I think that's often what trips a lot of people up when they move into architecture. Is often, certainly if you come from and I don't want to be like pushing in a kind of a stereotype on someone, but you get a lot of people who come from the very technical backgrounds. They move into architecture, and there is a real struggle to be able to move away from the technical side of things. I work with people who, Excel is about as far as it gets in terms of technology. So you need to be able to describe that problem in a way that everyone will understand. And then also within the business, you've got different levels of knowledge. So it's about understanding how to tailor that message for a board member, exec level, all the way down to the SME of that specific kind of that business area.
And do you think because you came from recruitment, firstly, that has been a benefit to you? Because, in recruitment, you would have been talking to anywhere between 50 and 100 people a week, and it's different conversations every single time. Some are more technical, some are pulling out the non-technical aspects of a role or a role that a candidate's doing. But is that one of the reasons why you feel that transition wasn't as difficult as people made out? Or
I think, definitely. I think, there'll be a lot of people out there who, aren't the biggest fan of recruiters, and, some recruiters, unfortunately, give them a lot of rep. But the one thing recruitment really does teach you, and if you spend any real time in it, is how to talk and communicate with people. You can't be a good recruiter if you can't communicate. Like it's impossible. The whole job is about relationship building and communication, and from that's how you place candidates or you work with clients to fill roles. That's at the end of the day, that's the job. So absolutely, I think it's the perfect bed to move into like a role like an architecture role. There are other roles like business analysis where it would be the perfect introduction, because stakeholder management and relationship building and communication skills take time to learn and to build. The technology bit and learning how to be technical, depending on what you need to do, is not necessarily as difficult. Unfortunately, as an architect, the expectation of me is I'm not expected to know everything about .NET programming. I'm not expected to know everything about, Kafka and stuff like that. I'm expected to know how these things fit together and how we use those things and how these things are used to solve a problem, rather than maybe it's great to know some of the implementation of that, but that's a longer skill. And that's actually in my world anyway, that's someone else's job. Developers, we have lead developers and developers who that's their specialism. That's where they thrive. So
It's
definitely
understanding
provides
the
a,
capability of the technology, isn't it? To because you need to understand what it's capable of doing to see whether or not it's the right solution for the problem, I suppose. And you're right. I think that's where, from my experience, again, I'm only on the recruitment side, but a lot of architects do get it wrong because they are really familiar with a specific type of technology, or they get sidetracked or magpied, as I like to call it, by this new piece of technology. And actually, yes, that's a great piece of tech, but it won't solve the problem that you've got. It's pointless having it in the stack.
it's kind of difficult with architects because there are so many different types.
Yeah.
And there's so many different levels of architecture as well.
Yeah.
You've got all the way at your enterprise level where, you might not even talk about our technology. You might not even talk about a brand. You talk
Yeah.
about concept. You might just go CRM, and that's your concept that you're working with. And actually, it's down to other people to understand what CRM or what technology we're going to use to support the CRM capability, all the way down to your technical architects, or what I would call technical architects, who are very, very, very specifically geared towards looking at a very specific area. So you might have cloud technical architects where all they're focusing on is adoption of the cloud and how we run stuff in the cloud, and how we maintain and manage and look after the cloud. So it can be really difficult. And, often people probably do get themselves pigeonholed. The term solution architect is probably the broadest term. And sort of why I fit in quite well, because I'm not at this level and I'm not down at this level. Very much kind of sit in the middle from my experience.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because architecture does have this perception. I did a post on it on LinkedIn a while back, because I did some research. I just did like a general search on LinkedIn and a couple of other tools that I use to find people. Generic architect job titles, so cloud architect, solution architect, technical, etc., all of them. And how many of them, and I categorize them based on the number of experience they've got. And I think there's potentially a huge problem in the future. And what I mean by that is there's only 301 architects at the moment that have got less than 2 years experience in the whole of the UK. But there's 25,000 that have got 15 to 20 years experience. Now, the argument or the counter argument to that is, well, actually, you don't start off as an accountant, you start off as a software engineer or cloud engineer, and then you move into architecture. And I can absolutely appreciate that. And you need to have a specialism of some sort because you need to understand it, the classic T shape. But I've always wondered whether or not there's an argument for, could we have like what I call an I shape? You start off really broadly, and we'll go into your roles in a minute. Start off really broadly at the bottom. You choose a specialism to go and become a master at, and then you go to your enterprise or your solutions level later on in your career, and you become the top end of the T shape, because then you're right at the early stage of your career. You're learning the skills that an architecture really needs alongside the technical. It's the softer skills. It's how do you communicate? How do you identify problems within a business? And as you said, almost like what a business analyst does in terms of requirements gathering, finding problems, and then going and finding the solution, but taking it all the way. Not just passing it over to the PMs. It's right, we're going to design a solution. Now we're going to work with it, build it, and so on.
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's definitely really important for you to have a really broad understanding of software development. So definitely having that kind of I shape, spending time with different teams. When I first started, that was one of the first things that I was sort of told. You need to get out there, go meet other teams, go see what they do, understand and learn about how they fit in this jigsaw puzzle, and come back to us and present how it comes together. Tell us what you've learned. And, I'm not telling any of these people anything they don't already know, but it's more from my understanding. And then also it's about, the confidence of presenting, but, I've learned this and this is correct and that. So it's a great way of doing it. And I mean, slightly different to my experience, but at EE at the time, they were running a graduate scheme, which kind of followed this I shape, where they have a kind of 2-year rotation, or it might have been 2 or 1 year rotation, and they spend 3 or 6 months in different teams. And actually, rather than saying you're going to do all the teams, they gave them a choice. Yeah. What teams would you like to be working? And then at the end of that graduate scheme, they all went into different roles within, a specialism. A couple became testers. One of the girls became, she's in DevOps, she's a DevOps engineer, very, very successful in that area as well. couple have gone into product. So unfortunately, no architect out of that, but that's just the way it works when you've got such a broad spectrum of roles.
Cool. And
And it's
so
competition.
as well, there's so many areas. So thanks for going through the sort of structure of that as well. But I'd like to know how you were feeling going into that role. No, like technology experience in a commercial environment whatsoever. All of a sudden, what was the job title? Associate architect.
No, it was technical solutions professional.
Technical
I
solution.
think that was the job title.
Okay.
Something like that. I did know that the first job title was digital architect technician.
Okay.
And that was the EE job title.
Yeah.
So that was a really nice job title, which I was given. And the point of that, it sounds like a pretty odd job title, but it was basically not to give me the kind of junior status it was giving me the junior status and effectively the trainee without calling me a junior. It was a way of respecting me as a person without, I'm not 18 years old apprentice. I'm a 25-year-old fully grown adult who's been working for a number of years. So it was quite a nice job title to have. And then it changed into technical solutions professional when we were absorbed by the mothership that is BT. We aligned to BT's job title. So it was, I can't say, I wouldn't say I went into it with a degree of like real assurance and confidence in myself. I knew that I did the interviews, and as part of the interviews, one of them was like, talk us through some architectural concepts. I'd go in research and learn, which is, a huge part of the job is 50% of the job is going away and learning and understanding and finding out how things work. So, I knew that I could do that bit, but I didn't go into the first day going, I'm going to be the best architect in the world. This is going to be perfect. I won't lie to you, at the time I thought to myself, well, I can always go back to recruitment. I haven't burnt any bridges there. If it doesn't work out, I can do 6-12 months in this. If it doesn't work out, I'll go back to recruitment. I'm really good at it. And I knew at the time my old boss would have me back in a heartbeat. Because they didn't really want me to leave at the time. But I knew that I needed to really apply myself. So very much like the first few months was just throw myself into whatever I could. If I was asked to do something, it was like, yeah, cool, I'll go and do it, and go work it out. I knew that I had this really good support network around me, especially I'll call out a couple of people. I was at the time, the lead architect was James Armstrong, who I'm still really good friends with now. He was really supportive. Graham Lake, Ali Khalik, they were really, really supportive of everyone on the team. Was bought into the fact that I'd been brought in as a kind of novice. I needed to learn and be taught. So everyone was on board with supporting me, but they were also, everyone was on board with, well, Tom's going to be given work and Tom's going to get on with work. Like, it's not going to be a case of you sit there for a year and just watch and observe. No, you're going to get involved straight away. And that for me is the best. I find that the best way of learning. Some people might find that really daunting, but I personally, I prefer to learn by doing than reading and listening. But to just be given a task, go away and work it out and get some feedback. And there was a really positive culture in the architecture team and in general in that area that I worked in, both on the E and when it became BT as well, of constant feedback loops. So you knew when you were on top of things, and you knew when you weren't on top of things, and you knew when there was things that you needed to learn and there was mistakes that had been made, and where we could improve. So I was really fortunate that although maybe I went into it with a degree of trepidation, I had the right network around me to help me grow. And I never really looked back. I never at any point looked back and sort of went, I'm not sure. It was kind of like within a week, I was like, right, this is my new home.
Fine. Okay, good. And, you were the youngest architect, what, 25 years old when BT sort of hoovered up EE? Is that right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, the EE BT relationship was a weird one. So at the time when I first joined, EE and BT, although BT already owned EE was their own thing. So they still had their own hiring practices, their own HR. We were then, the technical terms 2P transferred over into BT. So we became official BT employees, even though we were already BT employees via, the way that these mergers and acquisitions happen. Yeah, I think it goes without saying at the time, to a certain extent, probably still am probably one of the youngest architects you come across. And that's purely because the traditional route, as you said, is you go spend 10, 15 years in development. You start from the ground up in development, become often lead developer or senior developer or principal engineer, And then you move into architecture. Architecture is the kind of the natural, unless you want to go down the engineering management route, architecture is often the next step. So I probably was the youngest, and I was definitely working with people at BT who had been working in IT longer than I had been alive, which is quite difficult because you really have to know
how did that make you feel? Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you go into a meeting and, I wouldn't lie to you if I said that I went into some recruitment meetings and, not fake it till you make it, but you'll say you know something when you know that you're going to have to leave that meeting, and the first thing you do is you go on Google and Google it. I knew very quickly, and I found out very, very quickly that I couldn't do that in a lot of the meetings that I sat in and a lot of the conversations I sat in. I had to be. So what it did make me be is prepared. But I think because I was prepared, they respected that and very much took that on and worked with me. I think you can sometimes in architecture, I think sometimes has had a reputation, especially historically, of being this kind of white tower, this kind of ivory tower out of the way. They throw documentation over the fence and then the development teams crack on, and development teams really don't get to see much of the architects. That's definitely changing now. Certainly in my experience, I've often sat with development teams rather than kind of sitting with a group of architects, or I'm in regular contact with them and what sort of not handhold them, but be with them every step of the development process, which is often quite difficult.
Yeah.
Just for time. But by being prepared, going into conversations and meetings with these kind of really quite senior people or really, really experienced people, I think there was a degree of respect for, I wasn't just trying to blag it, and it wasn't trying to just get away with the bare minimum. I was working hard to kind of bring myself up to their level, as it were, or at least get halfway there.
Yeah. And that leads me really nicely onto sort of one thing I wanted to understand, because there will be people in your position that want to go down the architecture route at an earlier age. What did you have to learn first and quickly? You mentioned there preparing for meetings, so it doesn't look like you're turning up and you don't have a clue whatsoever. So preparation's absolutely one. What else would you say, these are the key things? You mentioned stakeholder management as well.
Yeah, I think the thing is with like things like stakeholder management, and you kind of having and being prepared for things, you're either one of these people who is super prepared. I'm generally, like, me and my wife often laugh and joke at each other because we're the same person. We're both hyper organized. We don't like to be anywhere late. We don't like to be underprepared or over prepared for anything. We prefer just to be right. So you're either that type of person or you're not. Some people thrive not being prepared, and they just go in and they take it on, whereas I needed preparation. But I think the biggest thing that I was really just trying to understand where an architect sits in an organization and what their role is. And that's the biggest thing I think I had to learn quite quickly. And what you'll learn and what you'll find out with lots of different organizations, and even within organizations, different architecture teams, they actually operate differently. We all have the same kind of theme around what our day-to-day work is, but they operate differently. I was fortunate where EE was the digital architecture team at EE, and it wouldn't be unfair to say it was not necessarily the most formal architecture team in the world. So you hear all of these big architecture frameworks get thrown out, and they borrowed elements from it, but it was really an agile architecture team in the sense that it was trying to very much support the agile development teams rather than being this super traditional, straight-laced architecture function. They had a lot of the same themes and governance that you'd have in that, but in a slightly more informal sense. So that was a great place for me to learn. And but in terms of like other preparation, the big thing of me is just understanding the basics of architecture, understanding the basics of diagrams and documentation. Most of my job, I'm not talking about how to build a solution and solve a problem, is documenting how we do that. So you need to be really kind of on top of and happy that is your role. Your role is to help provide the solution and get the business to solve a problem. And actually, a lot of the time, it's shepherding the business in that direction rather than physically solving the problem, letting them come to that conclusion themselves, and then documenting how you do that and how we do that. So there's a lot of understanding, kind of your basic architectural concepts if you're going to go work for a certain company, about understanding their tech stack, just a little bit about what do they work with. If they're a Java house, what versions of Java do they tend to use? What tooling are they using underneath it? If they're in the cloud provider they're using, what services are they using within that cloud provider? The basic stuff that will just help you get started.
Yeah. Okay. And from a business perspective, if a business was to, steal EE's idea, so to speak, because there is this big push on diversity, and this is genuinely a fantastic answer to plug in that gap at the lower level, to, change the age range in architects, to change the gender, the whatever it is. This is genuinely a fantastic answer, and certainly one I'll be speaking to clients about. But if you were to go back again, or based on what you've learned with EE, I'm not saying they didn't provide it or whatever, but what would you say a business would have to have in place to support this transition?
Have to have the buy-in of the wider team.
Okay. Because you had a great support network, didn't you? So
I had a really, really good support network, and to be honest, the team at EE at the time was, I think it was about 9 architects.
Okay.
So you had sort of 8 or 9 architects to one junior, which is a fairly good ratio. I think maybe you could probably have maybe another in there, but it really requires the buy-in of the team that we're going to hire someone and they're going to require their hand to be held, and they're going to require a lot of attention from you and a lot of time from you. It will go without saying, but I'd sit at a couple of the guys' desks for hours talking to them about what they're working on and what problem they're trying to solve and how they're solving it, and explaining to me exactly how things work. And you really require the buy-in of the team to do that. So that would be the first bit. And the second bit was really trying to understand, what are you trying to get out of bringing a junior on board? Are you just trying to fill a team and build a team? Or are you actually trying to generate a genuine conveyor belt of new talent coming in? And how are you going to nurture that talent? I was at BTE, I was there for sort of 4 years, which I don't know if it's a long time or not. I think when I was a recruiter at the time, the average tenure of a permanent employee was sort of 2 years, maybe a little bit longer. So I was there a good while, and I certainly was, from my perspective, I was nurtured. I was brought from the kind of junior, and then I was eventually promoted to a kind of full digital architect. It was solutions architect. So, there was a route for progression. So that's the other thing, is like, what is the route of this new person progression? Are we planning on having lots of technicians or lots of juniors, and they're all going to fight for a single architect role? Or are we going to naturally progress these people through the roles as and when they're kind of ready? And I was very fortunate that there was a route for progression for me. The only reason sort of I ended up leaving in the end was I just wanted to go see other things. I felt like, not that I was beginning to be pigeonholed, but I also sort of craved a little bit more of a kind of formal architecture team as well, so I could learn the differences between the two and kind of get that. And I was fortunate I got that at Every, because they were, far more formal architecture function, and actually a much bigger architecture function than I was used to.
And how have your roles evolved as a result of that move, then, going from as you said, less formal function to a more formal, larger function?
I think there's definitely a lot more of an emphasis. Certainly when the move between BT and Every, there was a far more a bigger emphasis around governance, around structure, around how things are done as an architect. You had a very kind of basic template of, this is the kind of artifacts you produce, and this is this. We'll work within that. Certainly when I went into Every, it was far more fairly prescriptive, in the sense that this is how we do a diagram. This is the format of a diagram. This is the standard we use, regardless of the situation. Here's the templates for the exact documentation we do. And we have a very prescriptive, before anything can move forward, it has to go through these governance gates. We had that at EE, but maybe not in a kind of as formal a sense. So it was definitely not like a culture shock, but it was definitely quite eye-opening to, how different two organizations can be.
Yeah.
But you've actually got the same role. And now I'm at Jet2 where I'm kind of somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Jet2's architecture function is we're growing and maturing very, very quickly. The current senior architects, lead architects have been at Jet2 for a long time. They have gone down the traditional route of developer, lead developer, team leader, architect, lead architect. And I suppose they brought me in to complement their very, very technical background. It's like kind of different viewpoint of stakeholder management, managing kind of really, really broad teams rather than going into the detail. So I'm very much now in a halfway house, albeit we are trying to formalize a lot of our we're trying to improve as a function and make sure we're more efficient and we're more purposeful than we are, I suppose, today.
That's
We're
great
trying
for
to
you,
improve.
because you've been there. So this is what every did. You weren't necessarily saying those words, but this is what every did.
This is what I've done before. This is my
this is what-
experience.
exactly. And it's so good that you made that move. Yes, 4 years may seem like a long time, but you did a number of different roles in those 4 years. So you were progressing your skill set and experience, but then going, makes absolute sense. Well, what future wise then, where do you see what are your aspirations? Where do you see your career going? What do you want to achieve?
Yeah, it's kind of it's still really young.
Yeah.
So I think from my perspective, I'll always be like the kind of the young whatever job title I end up having. I think longer term, I would really like to move towards like kind of enterprise architecture type stuff. Jet2 at the moment don't have an enterprise architecture capability, but that's not to say that we don't need one. And we'll I'll probably eventually get there. And so it'd be nice to progress at Jet2. First and foremost, I'm sort of 9 months down the line, but I'm finding with Jet2, the area I work in is so broad. You learn something new every couple of hours, and you meet new people constantly. It's such an enormous organization, an aviation, an airline, and a holidays company. There's such a broad spectrum of stakeholders and teams that you have to familiarize yourself with. I'm still very much learning. So I think long term, the enterprise architecture route is the route I'd like to go down. In the meantime, I am trying to really familiarize myself and become a better technologist, I suppose is the easier way to describe it. So fortunately here at Jet2, we're given the freedom to go and try slightly new things ourselves. So at the moment, I'm learning a bit of React, which for my sins is probably no good whatsoever for the standard, but at least I'm familiarizing myself. So, but the long term is, enterprise architecture, who knows, CTO, CIO, one day, maybe head of architecture. But for now, I'm kind of really enjoying where I'm at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. What advice would you give to any aspiring architect, whether that's, from a similar background to you or not?
Just apply yourself.
Yeah.
Be open to ask questions. You commonly hear it. There's no such thing as a stupid question. But when you're really starting new and wanting to get into the profession, there really is no such thing as a stupid question. Like, the only stupid questions are the ones that don't get asked.
Yeah.
So, keep your eyes open and constantly make sure that you're asking whatever you need to ask. And even if you need to ask, because you get the same answer in technology, there's a million different ways of doing the same thing. So you might ask person A one thing and ask person B the same thing and get two completely different answers. So be prepared to take that in and realize that actually, as an architect, we have to balance multiple viewpoints and multiple ways of doing things. But the big thing for me is just do it. Just go for it. Like for me, it's been such a rewarding process. And it's definitely my stakeholder management has helped, but that's improved even since then. I think it's probably fair to say I was quite hot-headed before, because I think that's the recruitment background is like constant cracking the whip and moving forward. So even since becoming an architect, that existing skills have improved as well. So it's really just about getting involved, applying yourself and trying to take as much on board. And I think from an employer side of things, I think it's, you probably know better than me, but certainly when I was recruiting for architect, there's not many of us. We're not an abundant resource at anything in IT. There's still competition, regardless of the market. There's always competition in IT and in technology in general, because, we just don't have the numbers, especially in the UK, that we need. So be open to these new routes. And we're talking very sort of heavily about architecture, but even the other traits as well, let's call them non-technical traits, your BAs, your POs, these are roles that you really need to enable your business. Put the opportunities out there, because, and as long as you've got the right intentions, you'll find the right people.
Okay. Thank you for that. And just touching on one of the points of your answer, what makes good stakeholder management?
For me, it's honesty and being candid, whilst also it's very difficult. It's balance, being honest and candid, whilst also being respectful of, you need to understand the kind of the environment you're in and the context you're working in, if that makes sense. The biggest thing I always learned in recruitment, and you see people complain about it all the time on LinkedIn, I haven't been kept in touch by my ex-recruiter. Ex-recruiter is useless, because they rang me and then I had an interview and then I never got any feedback. And it's the kind of being honest, being candid, but also just keeping on top and keeping in touch. People much prefer, I think most people, very few people out there aren't bothered about being kept in the loop. Most people just want to know what's going on, constantly updating people. And I think that's the basis of good stakeholder management is, understanding how to communicate with them, but then also keeping in contact. And I think that's probably something most professions, not just architecture, can take away.
Right. Very good. Thanks for that. Well, sadly, Tom, we've run out of time. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been a really excellent episode. Been really interested in just understand your journey. And hopefully businesses will be listening and going, actually, that's a really, really good way for us to solve this problem or plug that gap and whatever. So thanks very much for going into the detail of that. And thanks very much for your time.
And thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me on.
And that's a wrap. Sadly, we're at the end of another Transformational Blueprints episode. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it and there were plenty of golden nuggets for you to take away. If you're a fan of the show, please do remember to share, like, and leave reviews so that more people from our industry get to hear and benefit from these too. Please also follow Jet2 Group on LinkedIn to keep up to date with new episodes. Links in the show notes. Join us next time for another episode packed with tips and advice from senior leaders in the technology world.